I'm joined now by tech guru and board executive, Dr. Juliet Ehimuan, who's also former director for Google West Africa and founder of Beyond Limits. So we have a laundry list of your favorite subject matter this week around the world. It's Apple, it's AI, it's lawsuits, it's investigations. But the first story is that the EU is going guns blazing, clamping down on these big tech giants. And some of the allegations are that things like self-preferencing their own services. It's also saying that Meta, for instance, its pay and consent model is forcing users to consent to terms and conditions for the free service, which they say violates the law. Of course, it brought out this Digital Markets Act. And I mean, this seems like an onslaught, a regulatory onslaught.
Well, it's actually not new. So for a while now, the EU has been very consistent in monitoring the activity of the big tech giants to make sure that there are no activities that are anti-competitive or antitrust.
Right.
And the Digital Market Act, which came into force on the 7th of March, is really aimed at that, looking at curbing the dominance of big tech giants in the digital marketplace and just making sure that, I would say, 3 buckets of things are ensured. One is that there's an open and fair market.
Okay. That
these players don't use their position to freeze out other players, that we continue to maintain an open market space. The second is to ensure that there's data protection for users and that users are protected from illegal or harmful content. And then the third is, to make sure that you don't have steering policies that push users in one direction, right, when they don't have other options. So one example, like you mentioned, is Meta's pay or consent policy, which has received some pushback because basically what that policy says is that you need to either consent to your data being used, or you subscribe to the platform, right? You subscribe to the subscription service. And the feedback is that people should actually have another option because it's almost like you either pay.
You're backed into a corner.
Yeah, exactly. You either pay
or you subscribe. So one way or the other, you're letting go of cash.
Well, exactly. And of course, based on NDPR, data protection, it's good to get users' consent. But you want that consent to be given freely, not with a sense like people don't really have a choice. So that's why there's a backlash on that. And also, monitoring Apple to just make sure that people have the option to easily use another browser, different from the Safari default browser on iPhones. Now, there are a number of organizations being monitored, about 19 companies based on size. So if you have at least 45 million users in the EU, so you have 8 social media platforms, the usual suspects, Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, YouTube, TikTok, X, Snapchat, Pinterest, and then you have 5 online marketplaces: Amazon.com, Bookings.com, Alibaba, AliExpress, and a German one, Zalando. The Play Store, so Apple App Store and the Google Play Store, as well as search engines, Google Search and Bing, Apple's Bing. So it's just really monitoring to make sure that the practices are fair and we continue to have an open market.
From a consumer's perspective, it's nice to know that many of these platforms that we use in our daily lives, we're being protected, so to speak. But companies are constantly innovating.
Yes.
And so if you're able to bring these tech giants within the rules, to play by the rules, as innovation advances, there will be new areas of investigation to be opened up because you're creating new products.
Absolutely.
And so if you're not able to compete in one space, you will innovate to create another product that allows you to compete, and that may then come under the radar of these regulatory regimes.
Yes. So 2 things. One is to mention the fact that a lot of these players are actually intending to be compliant, right? A lot of them have policies around, protecting the user, best practices and so on, right? Responsible behavior. But also, like you said, innovation is constant, and that's why the EU, that's why I said this is not a new thing.
Yes.
The EU is constantly monitoring, when there's another wave. Now we have the AI wave.
Yeah.
So
that's a new frontier.
Exactly. So we're going to have a new suite of products and all that. And I think it's good for the EU to just continue to monitor this and make sure that everyone feels comfortable and practices are free and fair.
Indeed, indeed. Still on the tech story. So Apple is seeking cooperation with the Chinese authorities, China, around artificial intelligence. Now, I find this story really fascinating because US-China relations, insofar as technology is concerned, has been strained for many decades. But here's a private sector player, Tim Cook, and Apple reaching out to collaborate. What's this really about?
Yes. So this announcement was made by Tim Cook, Apple's CEO, at the shareholders meeting.
Right.
Now, Apple has been a bit slow to the party when you think about generative AI. You have, front runners like Microsoft and Google. But even though Apple has been investing in artificial intelligence in its manufacturing, when it comes to generative AI and large language models, it has been a bit slower to the party. And you can imagine, I'm sure that's a question that would be top of mind for most shareholders, right? So
Why?
that announcement was important to say, we do have plans, and you'll be hearing more about those plans later in the year. And one of those plans is partnering with a significant AI player in China, Baidu.
Okay.
So Apple is looking to leverage one of Baidu's AI products called the Ernie bot in its iPhone 16, Mac OS, and iOS 18. And it's also looking to extend that relationship and, collaborate with the Chinese government that is being very supportive in this context. And if you consider the fact that a lot of Apple's supply chain is in China, this is a natural extension of that relationship. And it is actually leveraging Chinese technology. So to your point about the US government, clamping down and, looking to diversify, we've heard about restrictions on NVIDIA chips going to China, etc. In this case, it's actually, the other way around. It is leveraging Chinese technology. So it is a positive thing. And given the fact that they're looking to invest a lot more in the AI space, it's understandable that would be on the table.
Interesting, Julia, I just remembered a quote someone once said that there are no permanent enemies, just permanent interests.
Absolutely.
So if the commercial interests align, why not? But that doesn't mean that China and the US will not continue on the geopolitical front. But the other interesting thing, I think earlier this year, we saw Apple's smartphone sales tank drastically. I think they dropped by 24% in the Chinese market, with others like Huawei benefiting from that. So, it's a shifting tides, really.
Yes, it is. In that same period, Huawei's smartphone, the Mate 60, which is a 5G phone, rose by 64%, while Apple iPhones declined by about 25%. So that's another interesting thing. And Huawei has been investing solidly in AI, right? And the production of AI chips. It has, one of the most popular non-NVIDIA AI chips out there is produced by Huawei, the Ascend 910B. And so, one can understand that there probably is also a link there, to this intent to invest heavily in AI for subsequent production of the devices.
Interesting time. Still in China. China has taken the US to, well, I guess you could call it arbitration, if you like, at the World Trade Organization, saying it's not playing by the rules because of the subsidies on, I believe it's to protect electric vehicles in the US. Another interesting frontier in this US-China, brouhaha. Tell us about it.
Yes, so you have the Inflation Reduction Act, which came into being in 2022, post the pandemic, and the objective was...
This is in the US.
In the US, yes. The objective was to just help alleviate some of the challenges of the pandemic, the economic challenges. And one part of that is just really looking at climate change. And there's an $800 billion fund allocated to this to support innovations that promote climate change. Now, of course, electric vehicles are environmentally friendly, but they're very expensive to the user, expensive to produce and expensive to purchase. So there are subsidies that have been created from the range of $3,750 to $7,500 to just make these vehicles more affordable. Now, of course, the US is also looking at growing its economy. It's looking at growing production. In the last in the last 2 to 3 decades, as a result of globalization, the manufacturing capacity has gone down a little bit, right? 75% of lithium batteries are produced in China, right? It's the highest producer of these vehicle parts. And so the US is trying to stimulate production. And with these subsidies, countries like China, Russia, Iran, about 4 countries are exempt. And the US is saying that it's because they're obviously trying to solve for climate change within the environment, right? But the Chinese are saying that this is just a way of favoring local players and cutting out the competitors. With this one, we have to watch and see. I don't think that there's a huge leg to stand on in the from the perspective of China, because the US has that prerogative, right, to want to stimulate more local production and to say, if we're offering subsidies, let's offer those subsidies to vehicles where the batteries, which is the most significant component, the lithium batteries, are produced in the US. So.
Yeah, but we'll see how that one plays out. It's, these trade disputes are never quite straightforward.
Yes, and that's one for our sister, Ngozi Okonjo.
Yeah, of course, trade disputes, play by the rules, or,
The WTO.
Yeah, so. Final story is, why are Kenyan fintech companies heading to Ghana to find investors?
Yeah.
That's the big question for you. This the summit that's going on in Ghana.
Yes, the 3i Summit.
Yeah.
The Ghana space has been going through challenges.
Yeah, from an economic perspective.
I would really applaud the efforts of the Central Bank of Ghana, the Development Bank of Ghana, collaborating with the Monetary Authority in Singapore, which is the central bank in Singapore, right, to create this fintech conference.
Right.
The Monetary Authority in Singapore is a very, very solid organization. As at first quarter of last year, its reserve was about $34.3 billion. Now, having these actually 3 significant organizations in the finance space, partnering with an ecosystem player to attract, the who is who in fintech. So they have over 5 heads of state attending, over 50 governors from across 6 continents, over 100 investors, over 150 multilateral development finance institutions. So basically, it's going to be a breeding ground for deals, for partnerships. And I think it's a really positive event to be happening in Ghana. And I would expect that there'll be a huge participation from Nigeria. Of
course, you bet. But, it's always nice to see African countries collaborating, and Ghana does need that FDI right now, given where, we know all the economic headwinds there, not just in Ghana, but across the region.
Yeah.
We've run out of time, unfortunately. I was going to ask you about encouraging more women in tech, but I think you're a beautiful epitome of a woman who's made a fantastic name for herself in technology, and we really want to encourage more young women to go into these STEM subjects, so we see more brilliant minds. Thank you. I appreciate you always coming on the show, the very last show of our International Women's Month, celebrating women like Dr. Juliet Ehimuan, former Google Director for West Africa, tech guru and CEO and founder of Beyond Limits.